Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Eloise, and I'm a young learner and CLIL specialist. CLIL is Content and Language Integrated Learning. And I write ELT and CLIL course books, and I train teachers in international and bilingual schools on how to better integrate language into their subject classes.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle and I'm a young learner specialist too, and I'm a materials writer with more than 20 years teaching experience. And I also develop and run courses for primary ELT teachers, and I self-publish some of my own resources for inquiry-based learning.
So today we're going to talk about how we can put teachers at the centre of their development using inquiry-based learning. So I'll just run quickly through our plan for the talk. First, we're going to talk about what in-service teacher development typically looks like. We're then going to consider the purpose of CPD and the limitations of current models. And then in the main section of the talk, we're going to talk about how we think the way we offer in-service teacher training should be changed. And finally, we'll present our conclusions and some ideas about how to move forward.
But first, we'd love to know a little bit about you and what you do. So could you let us know in the chat box whether you are any of these options, whether you're a teacher educator, a director of studies, a school manager maybe, a writer or an editor, or something else. Or you may have a combination of these roles like Eloise and I do. Yeah, so please do let us know. And if you want to, you can tell us a bit more about your workplace and your context. So I can see lots of teachers in the chat and teacher trainers. Okay, great, brilliant. So continue typing your ideas in the chat, but we'll carry on.
Okay, so as many of you are teachers, and those of you who are teacher trainers and have other jobs, presumably were teachers when you started out, we want to look a little bit about what in-service teacher training actually looks like.
So maybe it looks something like this, where you're listening to maybe an expert or a trainer talk about something.
Or this maybe is a bit more reminiscent of what we're doing at the moment, something that's online that started happening a lot during the pandemic, but has also continued now, some kind of online training.
Maybe it's more kind of a workshop type training where you get to participate and discuss things like this picture here.
Or it might be something a bit more formal, or where you're being assessed by someone who is perhaps a manager in your school. So which types of teacher development do you recognise or have you experienced? So again, some of you are still writing, and I'm a bit sad that some of you, I've seen some of you are saying you're very burnt out. So in the chat box, so hopefully some of the things that Michelle and I are going to talk about might help with that. But now we're going to move on to looking at this. So can you please write now in the chat box just a letter A, B, C, or D, or a combination of those. Have you ever experienced any of these types of teacher training?
So think about the types of training and development that you've had in different circumstances. So maybe it's in your school or your workplace, but also it could be other types of training that you've chosen to do. So we've got some letters coming through now. So we've got quite a bit of a mix. So Mariam has had all these types of training. Some people are saying different ones. So that's interesting. Yeah. Okay, so what I want you to do now is to think for a minute about any development sessions or training that you've attended in your workplace. So if that's a school, in the school, to think about the types of sessions you've attended and what the topics were, and whether you found these sessions interesting and relevant. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a few seconds to think about that. You don't have to share this because in a second we're going to do a little poll. So just think about the training that you've received at work, if any, and how interesting and relevant you found it. And what I want you to do now is to rate this development, this training, in terms of its relevance and its impact on your teaching. And we're going to use this traffic light scale. So what does this mean? This means that you would choose red if you found the training very irrelevant to your teaching situation and it didn't have any impact on your students. And you choose green if it was extremely relevant to your context and it had really noticeable results in your classroom. And yellow would be something in between. Okay, now I see some of you are typing your answers in the chat box. This is great. But if you prefer, you can also do it digitally with this, this poll here. So you can use this QR code, or you can go to menti.com and type in this code that you can see here, 37208907, and you'll be able to access this poll there. Okay, but feel free to continue typing in the chat. So I can see some green answers here in yellow. Send the link in the chat. Okay, give me a second. I need to find that. I'm afraid I should have had that ready and I haven't. So give me 2 seconds.
I'll put the code in because someone's asked there for the code, Michelle. So I'll put that in.
The link.
Yeah, but someone also asked for the code, I think, so they can copy and paste it probably. So I've put that in as well.
Okay, thank you.
Oh no, that's the wrong one, isn't it? Sorry.
Delete. That's the wrong one.
Let me put the right one in.
That's it, 3720890707. And I'm going to see if any results are coming up. So let's see. Okay, we've got lots of greens. That's really good, actually. I wasn't expecting so many greens because usually when I ask teachers about their development, sometimes it is relevant, but not always. No, so that's interesting. So we've got some interesting results there, and in the chat also I saw a few greens. Okay. So today's session, in today's session, we wanted to think about how we can make our teacher training and development more relevant for teachers. And so we're going to start with this question here. So when we were planning this session, we came up with this essential question, which we hope to have answered by the end of the talk. So this is, how can we provide effective and relevant teacher development for all teachers? Because some of you said green, quite a lot of you, but some also said red. So those teachers may have different needs to the teachers who chose green. Okay, so this is what we're going to be looking at today.
So to be able to work out how to provide effective and relevant teacher development for all the teachers, we need to think about what the purpose of CPD actually is. And this is something that sometimes gets forgotten about, I think, in schools. I think sometimes there's this idea that teacher development should be offered and is required of the teachers. And this often makes it turn into some kind of box ticking activity without thinking so much about what the teachers' needs actually are. So there are two main purposes, I think, to CPD. One of them is to make teachers' classes more effective, and that will benefit the teacher and the student. So I think most teachers are happier when their classes run well and their students are obviously learning something. We all want to help our students. And of course, students are happier when they enjoy their classes and achieve their goals. And CPD should also help teachers to develop in their career and perhaps take on a special area of interest within teaching, for example, teaching pronunciation, something like that, or maybe help them to change roles or move into another area related to teaching, such as teacher training, or management, or writing. So let's look at the traditional format of teacher training, which we saw right at the beginning. So this is the picture, I think this was A, and it kind of looks like the type of classroom that as a teacher trainer, I might not be trying to encourage with the teachers that I'm talking to. It looks very teacher-centered. So if you can see there, the learners in this case are the teachers because they're receiving some training, but the learners are all listening, yeah, trainer-centered. They're listening to input from the trainer. And I kind of imagine in this scenario that what they're learning about it has been decided by the management of the school or the person who's delivering the training. Maybe that person could have asked the teachers. I saw someone mention in the chat box a bit before about doing a needs analysis. So yeah, I think often people will ask teachers or do a needs analysis at the beginning of the school year, but ultimately the person who's in charge of training at the school has decided. And unless the school's very large, there's usually the same training offered to all the teachers. If you've got a big school, then maybe you might have a few different sessions, but in general, it might just be one thing that all the teachers attend. And the person who delivers the training is usually a senior teacher or another teacher who's volunteered to deliver the training. So I think that the limitations of this type of training are quite clear. I think that the trainer isn't exemplifying what most teachers would now agree is good classroom practice, which is some kind of learner-centered classroom. The teachers don't have a very much intrinsic motivation if the topics have been decided by management and aren't always relevant to them. So if there was a needs analysis, then, you know, maybe a topic that they suggested would come up during the year, but not every topic. And from the traffic lights poll that we did before, you can see that some teachers feel that what the training they receive isn't relevant to them. And it's impossible, I think, for this type of training to be relevant to all the teachers because every teacher has different needs, different level of experience, different interests and different types of classes. And in this situation, the training is only as good as the person who is delivering the training. There may not be the level of expertise within the school to deliver the training that the teachers need or are interested in. So this can lead to demotivated teachers, and this in turn leads to demotivated learners.
So I'm going to zoom in for a second on one of those limitations, the fact that what teachers are learning about in their development sessions is often decided by management and is not always relevant to all of the teachers. So when we set up teacher development sessions in our schools, we need to ask ourselves this question. Should it be the trainer or the management who chooses the focus of a CPD session, or should it be the teacher who decides what they would like to focus on? I'm not sure what you think the answer of this question is. I don't think there is a correct answer anyway, but I think we need to think about how this decision impacts the relevance of the training for teachers. It's very hard to make training relevant to all the teachers in a school, especially in a big school, because the teachers will have different needs, different levels of experience, different interests, and different types of classes. So one size doesn't fit all. English teachers can find themselves in a large number of contexts around the world, but even within one school, the teacher's needs and levels of confidence can vary quite a lot because each teacher is working with different groups of people, their students. Their students all have their own needs, their own interests, their own strengths, and their own challenges. So we started this section with the purposes of professional development, and these should always be centered around the needs of the individual teachers and their learners, of course, where possible. And it's also important to remember that a teacher's needs are not static. They change throughout their career, and they may even change in a shorter period of time. So any training and development needs to be flexible enough to meet these changing needs.
So it's kind of become clear to us that we need to rethink the format of teacher development. And this isn't a new idea that Michelle and I have just invented. This idea has been around for a long time. And a couple of things that made me start thinking about this idea. The first one was a long time ago in 2011, when I was lucky enough to attend the IATEFL conference in Brighton. And I saw a talk by Silvana Richardson, and she was talking about some of the problems with this one-size-fits-all model of inset. And she also talked about her experiences of leading a different type of professional development, which was based on some of the models that Michelle is going to talk about in a minute. And what's interesting about this, I think, now is that this was in 2011. The audience seemed quite interested and engaged and had a lot of questions, but a lot of people seemed quite unsure about how they could apply what Silvana was saying in their own schools. And around the same time, I read an article, a very interesting article by a teacher called Martin Lamb, which was called The Consequence of Inset. And he talked about a short in-service training program that he had delivered with some teachers in Indonesia. So I think he'd been there for a week working with these teachers. And a year later, he went back to find out how the teachers were getting on. And what he found out was a little bit depressing because he found out that most of the teachers had not changed their teaching in any way as a result of the training that they had received the year before. And there were he found many reasons for this, but I think that all of this made me question what I was doing as a trainer. At this time I was training teachers, but it didn't really make me change what I was doing because I wasn't sure how to. I carried on doing teacher training in the same way I had before, because although I think that my training was teacher-centered, as many of you are mentioning in the chat box at the moment, I would talk to the teachers about what they wanted to do. I tried to make sure they were the ones who were talking in the sessions. We were listening to each other, but it was still one size fits all because that's what I was being asked to do in the schools where I trained the teachers, and all the teachers had to attend the same training. That was the only option that we had. So I just wanted to clarify something. So I just mentioned that I tried to make my training learner-centered. So learner-centered approaches prioritize the learner and their needs. So as a teacher trainer, you can ask teachers what they want to learn about. Again, I saw someone mention this in the chat, maybe observe their classes to find out which things they need more help with. Perhaps speak to students to find out what they like about their classes or what they don't like. But then I would decide, based on this information, what we would cover in the training sessions, and all the teachers would do the same thing. But what Sylvana Richardson has spoken about, and the thing that I didn't really understand how to implement, was a learner-led approach. So a learner-led approach allows the student, which in this case is the teacher, to take charge of their own learning. So with teacher-led development, rather than trainer-led development, the teacher identifies what they would like to improve or learn more about. And this is often based on a problem that occurs in their classroom or something specific that they would like to achieve in the classroom. And this means that all the teachers could be focusing on different areas of their teaching at the same time. So you might understand how I felt confused. This sounds quite daunting. But then I met Michelle. This is me and Michelle meeting. And Michelle is a YL specialist, and she was talking about inquiry-based learning, which I already knew a little bit about from my previous YL teaching and writing experience. But I wanted to know more about inquiry-based learning, so I took her online course. And just to make it clear, this course was about using an inquiry-based approach when teaching young learners. And I thought it might be useful for my writing because I write materials for young learners. But while I was doing the course, I started to think, and it seemed like this approach might be a good one for implementing teacher-led teacher development. So you are probably as confused as I was. So what is an inquiry-based approach? Michelle is going to explain what this is.
Yeah, okay, so let's dive into inquiry-based learning and see how we can use it for teacher development. So an inquiry begins with a question, with an essential question or a driving question, such as the one that we started this session with today. Now, do you remember what it was? I wonder if you can remember what our question was. It was on a pink slide, but I'm not going to test you on it. But you do get bonus points if you did remember. So our essential question for this session was, how can we provide effective and relevant teacher development for all teachers? So this would be our starting point for the inquiry. It then follows a series of stages where the learner, or in this case, the teacher is the learner, they choose a narrower focus to investigate. So something that's relevant to them. They do some research, they try to find some answers, they try things out in the classroom, make changes to their teaching, and then they present their findings. And this is called the inquiry cycle. So there are different models that we can follow, but this, what I'm going to share with you now, is the approach that Eloise and I are currently using across a 6-week cycle. So the first stage is to support teachers in identifying where they want to develop. They need to identify an aim which is as specific as possible, and it's related to a problem that they have in the classroom. So in this first stage, teachers come up with a series of questions that they need answers to, and then they start to plan how and where they can find answers, find information that will give them answers. So that's how we start. Then in the next stage, teachers do research with the aim of finding answers. So I can see Helene says it sounds a lot like action research, Elisa. But yeah, so action research is a part of this. It's just that the inquiry provides the structure for that action research. So this research that teachers will do could be by doing lots of things. It could be by reading books, reading articles, research papers. It could be watching webinars, attending workshops. It might be talking to other teachers in the staff room or online. And so on. So there are lots of different ways in which we can do research, finding out information. It could also involve talking to their students and delving deeper into the problems, really getting to grips with and identifying what the problem is in order to be able to solve it. So these first two stages with the questions and the research sometimes contain some toing and froing that you can go back and forwards and backwards, and it's like a bit of a cycle because while you're doing your research you might find a new question to explore, or something that you learn might bring up further questions, or maybe something new happens in your classroom while you're doing this research and this might change your thinking. So once they've done their research, then it's time for them to digest what they've learned and analyze this information, these findings, using their knowledge of their students, everything, the context, the students themselves. And then it's time for them to plan some practical strategies for what they will do in the classroom based on what they've learned. So we've done some research, we've got some ideas about things we can try in the classroom. Then we work out what we're going to do in the classroom. And then ideally here they will start to implement these strategies or techniques, whatever it is, in the classroom and record results. So observing students again and recording the results. And in this stage, it can really help if teachers share their findings and actions with each other. And then in the final stages, they reflect on what's happening in the classroom and make adaptations. Maybe they refocus depending on their needs. It's time for them to also think about how far they've managed to achieve their objectives, their aims from the beginning, and think about what else they could do. Again, we encourage sharing. We encourage sharing in all stages, to be honest. But here it's important to share and share experiences with other teachers. Share what worked, what didn't work. And then there's this final stage where we invite teachers to present their inquiry results, and then this cycle could begin again. So this is just a summary of how we are doing this type of teacher development. And now Eloise is going to give you some examples, I think, of how she's doing it.
Yeah, so I'm in Mexico. I'm not sure if I'd mentioned that at the beginning. I'm not sure if anyone here is in Mexico. I think most people are in Egypt, right? But so this picture is the school that I'm working with in Mexico. It's an international school, and I help the teachers at this school to integrate English into their subject classes. So I have there are lots of teachers at this school. It's a school where they have from kinder right up until, so kids from 3 to 18. So when I first started helping this school, I had a really big group of teachers, and they all taught different subjects. Some taught maths, history, science. They all taught in English, but they taught a subject. Some of the teachers were British, some were Mexican, and some are other nationalities as well. They all taught different age groups. Some of them taught more than one age group. Some of the teachers had taught English as a foreign language before becoming a subject teacher. Some had only taught their subject in the UK, and now they were teaching in an international school. Some of the teachers had lived in Mexico for a long time or were Mexican. Others had lived in Mexico for less than a year. And some could speak the learner's first language, which is Spanish, and some couldn't. So you can see that these teachers have a lot of differences between them. So I don't know why I was surprised that when I tried to deliver input sessions for these teachers, I noticed quite a few things. I noticed that some teachers weren't really paying attention. Some teachers didn't really have any idea what I was talking about. Some teachers didn't understand why it was important to integrate English into their subject classes. Some teachers were really interested. Some teachers already knew a lot about teaching children who didn't speak English as a first language. And there was one similarity between all these teachers, which was that they all had to attend training for 1 hour after school on Mondays. And it was always, well, it was usually the same training for everybody. So this was in 2022 that I started doing this. And it was so this was kind of a bit before I had this idea with Michelle. So after I had this idea with Michelle, I spoke to the head of training at the school and told him about our idea to use inquiry-based approaches for teacher training. And I also wanted to make sure that the teachers I worked with were really interested in CLIL. So I asked if my training could be an option for teachers and not compulsory training. I didn't want to have all of the teachers in my group if they didn't want to be there. So as a result of that, the head of teacher training chose several different focuses for training. One of them was CLIL, which is the one that I'm helping the school with. And so now I have 8 teachers who've chosen to work with me. They're all from different departments. So they actually all still have the same differences between them from the big group that I mentioned just now. But because we're following the inquiry cycle that Michelle just outlined, this doesn't matter. The teachers are thinking about the problems that they have in class related to CLIL, and then choosing an area to research which could help them to solve that problem or improve it. So each teacher chooses what they want to focus on. So they've got 8 different topics. There's 8 different teachers and they have 8 different topics. At the moment, we're quite near the beginning of the inquiry, but I've already noticed some differences. The teachers have contributed a lot to short pieces of work I've asked them to do before our training sessions. They're much more engaged when I meet with them, and they seem much more motivated to work on this topic. They contact me sometimes outside of our training sessions to ask me things. They're also very keen to show me things. They show me their students' work. They show me exam papers. One of the teachers wants to help their students get better exam results by focusing more on academic language. So all of this shows me that they're a lot more engaged in the topic. Of course, there are also difficulties, but I'm going to talk about those a bit later on. Michelle's just going to focus on some more of the benefits.
Yeah, because I think that this type of approach does have a lot of benefits. First of all, and this is something we've talked quite a bit about already, and I think in the chat, a lot of people have also mentioned this, that it's based around the teacher's needs and, of course, the learner's needs, because the teacher's needs are hopefully related to the learner's needs. Secondly, it's a process that's carried out over time. Well, we saw that it's a cycle, and teachers can actually go back over and over again to do a bit more research and work on the same thing if needed. They can make small changes and tweaks to their teaching. So this enables teachers to really immerse themselves in this topic that they've chosen and make real change, rather than, as often happens, you go to a workshop and you hear an idea and then you try it out in the classroom once and then that's it, and you kind of forget about it. And that kind of change doesn't, that kind of activity doesn't really lead to proper change, real change. Thirdly, it's ideally a collaborative approach where teachers work together to find solutions to their problems. Now, this collaboration is not limited to inquiry-based learning. There are other types of professional development where teachers are invited to work together and support each other. For example, in critical friends groups, that's another mode of teacher development. But the framework of the inquiry helps support teachers through this process. And it's based on a constructivist approach. So we aim to support teachers to build their own knowledge and strategies that will help them reach their goals. So it's about helping teachers make those connections so that the theory and the information or the examples fit their particular context. And that context may be very different to another teacher's. And finally, teachers have agency. Agency is a really powerful motivator. And let's face it, not all teachers are motivated to take part in service training. Different trainers and managers that I've spoken to have all said that that they ask teachers what they would like to focus on in training sessions, and they think this is really important. And they do this maybe by informal chats or sometimes through surveys and things like that. But I would go one step further and say that the more control teachers get over the focus of their training, the more likely they'll be motivated to explore it. Particularly if the aim is to develop it over a sustained period of time. It's something that we want teachers to be working on throughout maybe the school year. So an inquiry-based approach can really empower teachers to take action because it's all on their terms. They're the ones who choose what to focus on. They do the research and they draw conclusions together. They work together to come up with solutions and ideas, which they then carry out in the classroom. So they're beginning this process of action and reflection, which inevitably leads to better outcomes for their students. And that brings me to my last point here. The students, that's another benefit. They're the ones who will really benefit from effective teacher development. So if we ensure that we put our teachers' needs first in our CPD programs and we support them with leading their own CPD, their own development, then this will translate into the teacher doing the same in their classroom and putting their students' needs first.
So everything that Michelle has explained so clearly makes a lot of sense. But as I mentioned earlier, these ideas about learner-led teacher training, where the learners are the teachers, have been around for quite a while, but they still don't seem to be trickling down to a lot of schools. And when we ask teachers about the problems with the professional development that their school offers and how it might be improved, it never seems to move away from the fact it looks like an input session. So why is this? Let's just look at some of the obstacles that schools have towards adopting a more learner-led style of teacher training and some possible solutions towards this. So I think the first problem is the one that I just mentioned, which is that management don't have the time or the experience to consider how to change their CPD offering. So the training that the senior teachers or the trainers themselves are receiving is often in the same traditional model. So it's very difficult to envisage a different method. So, I mean, the solution to this is quite difficult. I think the only thing that we can do is to keep presenting these more student-led models and to keep providing information about them. It's a bit easier to do that these days through online and various different ways. So I think the more that we talk about this type of teacher development, the more likely it is that people will start to use it. Another problem is that or a problem that people think that there is that there aren't enough more experienced teachers within the school to offer the type of guidance that's needed for this type of training. But in reality, the person who is guiding the teachers doesn't need to be an expert in the area that the teacher has chosen. They really just need to be someone who's good at encouraging, who's good at asking the right questions, because we have access to so much information online that we can access teachers in other institutions, we can access experts, we can find all the information that we want. So schools aren't limited by the knowledge of their own teaching staff anymore. They can ask whoever they like to help. The next problem is one that I think everyone will recognise, which is the lack of time to do this type of training or this type of development. Teachers need time to research, they need time to observe and reflect. And schools are often unwilling to pay for this time or put this time aside for teachers in the school day. And, you know, I think that teachers' time certainly needs to be valued and paid for. But even if you have in your school maybe 1 hour, like the school that I work in, they have a 1 hour slot provided for teacher training each week, which is usually an input session. Even just by giving this over to a more student-led way of learning can be beneficial. So instead of having, you know, a different input session every time, you can be working on your inquiry. Sometimes you have a session with a trainer, and sometimes that time is used for doing your research, for reflecting and things like that. Another problem is that teachers sometimes feel like this is more work because it's quite different to having to just listen passively to a talk or a workshop. But I think that teachers, I mean, it is more work, but it's, you know, it's much more motivating work if the areas that you're researching are of interest to you and you can see how it's helping you in the classroom. I think most teachers become very motivated when they see that what they're doing is helping their teaching. Another problem for managers, for trainers and managers is this feeling that maybe they're losing control because you know, they're not sure whether the teachers are doing it or not. You know, teachers have a lot more freedom to be researching, to be choosing what they're doing. And I think that there will always be some teachers who aren't motivated to take part in professional development, and it's up to individual schools how they deal with this. But I think this way of training makes this a lot more evident, because if you're just attending a more traditional style of inset session, teachers can tick that box even if they're not developing their teaching. So, I mean, you can go to all the training sessions and say, yeah, I went to the session, but you're not really listening or participating, or it's not actually changing anything about your teaching. Whereas with a teacher-led approach to teacher development, it's much clearer who is putting in the work and who isn't, and who is developing their teaching.
So let's go back to our essential question that we asked at the beginning of the session. How can we provide effective and relevant teacher development for all teachers? And the all is really important here, so I want you to keep that in your mind as well. I hope we've been able to answer this question in part, or at least start to think about the problem and possible solutions. So to sum up our beliefs, our answers to this question, we believe that a more teacher-led approach makes development more effective than trainer-led or institution-led training, for the reasons that we've presented in this session. Secondly, teachers need time to develop. So this does mean carving out some time in their schedule for this purpose, but also avoiding making it compulsory. We think that teachers should be able to decide when and how they will engage in their continuous professional development. Thirdly, we need to support teachers in taking ownership of their development. So we can guide them towards choosing specific areas if necessary. So, for example, if you do observe teachers and you see that they need to work on certain areas, you can guide them towards those areas. But it should be the teacher's choice where possible. And finally, we need to consider the teacher's well-being and make sure that they're on board with this type of training, because if they don't want to do it, it's not going to work. So that's another thing to consider here. So we're coming to the end. We wonder if your ideas have changed at all during this session, or from what you were thinking at the beginning, and if your thoughts have changed at all by the end of the session now. So we've only got a couple of minutes, so I don't want to spend it doing this, but I would like you to go away after the session and think about this where possible. And think about your ideas around this question, because before we do that, we have something to share. So we'd like to invite you to our free Facebook group called The Teaching Lab, Engage, Explore, Excel. So in this group, we are facilitating topic-based professional development through inquiry-based learning. So each cycle, we explained before, the moment they're 6 weeks long, we have a topic and a general question that we explore. And then the teachers in the group come up with their own more specific questions related to their own teaching, and which they explore through research and ideally interaction and collaboration. So you're very welcome to join us, and you can join here with this QR code. And I'm going to find the link for you as well, so that you can join that way too. Eloise, do you want to say something while I find the link to the Facebook group before we finish?
Yep.
Sorry, just need to find the link.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the things that Michelle and I have spoken about in this talk, I think sometimes trying to change the way we carry out teacher training can seem quite challenging at first, but I think just starting small and trying things out, and certainly joining some kind of community like our Facebook group, or talking to people who are doing this type of training as well, that can really help, just to get you started on doing this type of training. So yeah, it's just taking the first steps, I think.
I don't think we have time for questions, but if you do have any questions that you want to ask us, you can get in touch with us. Here are our email addresses. And yeah, follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn. I've got a Facebook page as well. Always interested in connecting with teachers around the world, so we'd love to connect with you.